Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we apologize for the little bit of a delay. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Susan Edwards. I'm going to turn it over to Bruce. Most of you know Bruce, and then we will get started from there.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, we hope everyone is safe and well. On behalf of Susan and I, it's exciting to be back in front of you, continuing our efforts to try and bring practical skills to the table that will assist you currently and hopefully in a post-war environment. We have some special guests today that are going to be talking about how we treat each other across differences in the world of collaborative problem solving as it's been defined. But before we get there, I want to thank Luisa, I want to thank Olga, I want to thank our translators and everybody who is making today possible. Our special guests today from Convergence, or at convergencepolicy.org domain name, are Mariah Levison and Gabriel Herrera. Mariah is a good friend and colleague who's now the president and CEO of Convergence, and has been teaching collaborative problem solving for over 20 years in both community, government, and classroom environments. She's joined today by Gabriel Herrera, who's the programs director at Convergence and specifically responsible for online learning programs called Compass in particular. We also have Anya Lysko, who's a community mediator, and together they're going to collaborate on a demonstration that exhibits collaborative problem-solving techniques and methodologies in action. And in addition to the slides that are going to be presented, I'm told there will be some handouts translated appropriately, and Gabriel will define those in more detail momentarily. So we appreciate your generous gift of time this evening and think that it will be more than worthwhile as we attempt to bring specific problem-solving skills to your world. And thank you for your time and attention. Gabriel, shall we, do we want to turn things over to Anya next at this point?
Feel free, Anya, if you'd like to say a quick word, and then we can get started with the presentation with Mariah and myself.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. It's my big pleasure and big honor to work with you during this 1 hour. So let's start.
Thank you. Mariah, would you like to say anything before I go on to the next slide?
Yeah, so just wanted to echo Bruce and hoping that everyone is safe and well, and just sharing that my heart breaks for the things that you all are living through, and that I am grateful and humbled to be here and hope that we are able to contribute in some small way. So we recognize that the process that we're going to share today may need a fair amount of adaptation, both to your country and your culture and the conditions that you're in, but hope that we can provide you today with some useful tools as you hopefully very soon begin the work of rebuilding, or perhaps now at this time as well. So just a quick introduction to what is collaborative problem solving, which is the tool that we're here to share with you today. So that is a name for a process that has a lot in common with mediation and other alternative dispute resolution techniques that you may be familiar with. Collaborative problem solving is just the name that we use for all of the pieces that we have put together in this particular way. But it's really an evidence-based approach to bridging deep divides, whether those are ideological, political, cultural, geographic, to develop breakthrough consensus solutions on seemingly intractable public issues. So a couple of key elements of this approach that we're going to share with you today. We bring together stakeholders to an issue, many of whom never thought that they could talk to each other, sit down and work together, and who represent a number of things, but perhaps most importantly represent the full range of views on the issue that they've come together to address, and also the full range of influence needed to develop wise and durable solutions. We focus a lot on building trust in relationships and a shared understanding of the issues up front to lay a foundation for developing higher ground solutions that meet more needs of more stakeholders to important public issues. So we focus on this full range of views because we think no matter how divided folks are, people who have concerns about an issue on all sides have important things to contribute. And we are bringing the time, the design, and the facilitation together to help draw all of those things out and help people move beyond their seemingly oppositional positions to uncover their needs that many folks will share and figure out ways to integrate those into solutions that more stakeholders can buy into so that they can get done and that can just meet more needs. And we apply this method to all different kinds of public issues, whether those are in healthcare, or education, criminal justice. Our expertise is around this approach more than any particular issue. And we think with our work, we're not only able to solve real problems in people's lives, but also improve the capacity of people working on these issues to collaborate over the long run, to build that kind of social capital for ongoing collaboration and problem solving, and to demonstrate that it is possible to come together and share and solve shared problems together. So with that, Gabe is going to walk you through at a very high level, given our limited time, some of the key elements of this methodology. And we're so grateful to have Anya here, who will help us reflect on what will apply to your situation in the Ukraine, what will need to be modified, and just to respond in real time. Gabe?
Thank you, Mariah. So today is really, a conversation around how our collaborative problem-solving model can potentially support efforts to live and work together in the aftermath of war. And so Anna is here to help us in the exploration of possible application of strategies to public issues specifically, how this process might work, what might need to be adapted, what might be some of the challenges, and where are there some opportunities. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on as we walk through our collaborative problem-solving process. So Anna, thank you so much for being here to bring this presentation to life. So as Mariah mentioned, CPS, or collaborative problem solving, is the methodology and the approach that we'll be discussing today. And at Convergence, we have a 4-step process. So you can see here the 4 steps. It could take, a week to go through all of the process, but today I'm going to try my best to go through step by step in a way that's quick, but still, feels like we're able to share a lot about what's involved as we go through, and of course, Anna to help us talk through each step in terms of its application. So first we have our discovery and design phase, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but it's really all of the pre-work that's done before we start bringing folks together to have these dialogues. And then the major part, of course, is convening diverse participants. I'll talk a bit about what that exactly involves. And then together, we work on trying to develop together higher ground solutions. That's a term that you'll hear us use a lot. So the idea here is not just about finding common ground, but really trying to elevate all of the shared needs and interests for mutual gain in developing these higher ground solutions that would not be possible if folks were working in their own silos on their own. And then finally, the implementation phase of implementing the solutions and the different resources and commitments that are needed to make that successful. So that's the process we'll be walking through today. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start with phase 1. So our first phase, which again is called discovery and design, again, this is kind of the pre-work that's done, really has 2 components. First is that we're assessing the conflict. So we're identifying exactly the issue and what it is that's keeping this issue stuck for as long as it has been. So conducting the background research and then identifying the diverse stakeholders that have feelings and perspectives around the issue itself, and making sure that we then conduct interviews with those individuals to learn about their diverse and unique perspectives. So what really does differentiate our process is that we try our very best to get the full range of views and influence, so that we're making sure to include everyone, folks that historically maybe have never worked together or been in the same room. After we do that, we design the process. So we're identifying who are the 10, 20, 30 people that need to be together at this table. And we frame the issue in a way that is inviting and neutral so that folks will actually want to participate, and then plan the details accordingly. So before I ask Mariah to give some examples and for Anna to react, I'm just going to give one quick kind of demonstration of how we define and frame an issue. So there might be a framing that could come off as polarizing and maybe not the most inviting, which in this example, I'm using the title of welfare reform. And so what we do is frame the issue into a way that feels more disarming and more inviting to folks, which might, in this situation, be supports for working families. That's something that most people can get behind and think is an important value. One of the things, too, that we do is really think about, who do we need to interview to create the best understanding of the issue? And who are the key parties that really need to be at that table so that we can solve this completely? And again, what is that neutral framing that we'll be inviting to all stakeholders? With that, Mariah, are there any examples from Convergence's work you'd like to share before we ask Anna to react?
Yeah, so I'm going to use one example of our work throughout this presentation to try to illustrate what we're talking about. So we have currently a project in one U.S. state called Kentucky, in which they identified a challenge that they didn't have enough childcare providers. So when two parents are in the workforce, the kids need to be somewhere. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, they lost about half their childcare providers and felt that they were at a crisis point. And so on these big public issues, sometimes Convergence as a nonprofit looks around and says, this is an issue that's stuck because the stakeholders to it have not been able to align on a path forward. And other times, institutions or communities reach out and say, we're stuck and we think bringing people together to collaboratively solve this problem would be helpful. So in this case, a business association, the Kentucky Chamber, so it's a member association for businesses in Kentucky, came to us. So that was how we identified the issue. They said, we have lost half of our childcare providers. We know that there are about 3 kids for every available slot. But what we know is that we don't have alignment among the stakeholders on what the solution is. So what we've tried to solve the issue, we haven't been able to. And so in that case, that's a little bit about how we identified the issue, and how we framed the issue was the name of that project became the Kentucky Collaborative on Childcare. And as an example to illustrate, at one point we thought we might call it high quality childcare, with the recognition that everybody wants their kids to be in a good place. But we ended up dropping off that adjective because many of the stakeholders were worried about just the access, and that if we focused too much on the quality, we would limit the access. And so instead of creating that kind of binary, that we should name it just generally about childcare and then work through those issues on quality and access together. And identifying the participants, we tend to have really very multi-stakeholder, very diverse in a whole bunch of different ways participants. And so sometimes it's through our research that we uncover who would need to be there. Where we have a good partner, like we did in the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, they were able to give us a list to start, and then we were able to help them think through if there were any gaps. And so those included childcare providers, state and local government, employers who were struggling with their employees not having access to childcare and who wanted to be a part of the solution, philanthropic partners, the public school system, and some representatives of economic development and others. So now we'll pass it to you, Anna, if you want to share how this might apply to an example in the Ukraine, or just your reactions or questions about how this first phase of identifying and scoping a project, what might work or what might need to be modified in the Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all. And so should I take the particular case or just general thoughts?
Maybe the process in general, how it might apply to an issue in the Ukraine, or how you think generally it might apply to, community or public-wide issues. But really, I think, Anna, and just to acknowledge you again, just responding here live with us, we really appreciate you doing that in real time. I think whatever comes to your mind will be really valuable.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the possibility to speak to you today. So I think this approach is totally, will totally work fine in Ukraine. And this first issue, so we identify the conflict, then we make research, we figure out the stakeholders, and then we make this plan. Then we frame the issue, and then we make the plan, yes, for more details. So I think it will work totally okay in Ukraine.
Right. I think one of the things that stands out about this phase that some other entities who bring people together don't do as much of is we interview a lot of people, and that really helps us understand what's really that full range of perspective so that we know how to design the process, both in terms of what to call it, who to have there, what topics. So I wonder, when you think about, I don't know if there's any issues you can call to mind or not, Anna, but when you think about if there was an issue who you might need to interview or talk to, does that seem clear to you, or any differences there you would think about?
Well, it seems absolutely clear. I think it can be some difficulties, for example, in some issues with identifying the party, right? Because, for example, today we have a lot of conflicts. So we have a lot of, for example, organizations who take care, of some military forces and represent military forces, and they are usually very active. But we have a lot of such organizations. So sometimes it can be more difficult to identify which organization should take part in this solving process, and which organizations will be more destructive.
Yeah, that's a great point. And similar challenge in the US, whether you're talking about nonprofits or labor or government, there's always lots of entities, and figuring out who's most representative, who has the most influence, who's going to participate in a constructive way is a challenging part of the process. And the main way that we do that is through those interviews, but that's absolutely a challenge. All right, Gabe, you want to move us on to the second phase?
Thank you. Absolutely. So in the second phase, this is the convening phase. And, Anna, you mentioned it's hard to determine who should be at that table, right? You have folks that might be challenging to work with, right? And some people that might be the obvious answers. And the idea here is to try and really have the unusual suspects, the unlikely allies, the people who typically are not in shared space together. Of course, ones that agree and buy into what the ultimate goals are, right? You don't want folks that are going to be there and be destructive. Certainly they can disagree, but we do want folks that are going to be coming together to work collaboratively. So we're bringing those parties together. We do want them to have diverse perspectives, skills, backgrounds, experience, and expertise so that we can have a more comprehensive approach to coming up with higher ground solutions. One of the things that is most important, and it sounds, quite easy, but can be difficult in practice, is to really spend the time needed to build relationships and facilitate trust. Our process, it depends on the specific project, but sometimes can be months or even up to years long. We're not meeting every day, certainly, but sometimes, once a month or once a quarter at least. And so it does take time to build these relationships and facilitate trust. One of the really big benefits, though, of regularly bringing groups of different people together is that you start to reduce prejudice, you start to build empathy, you have folks starting to care about each other and have psychological investment, and they start to actually care about each other's viewpoints. And so that piece around building trust and relationships can't be overlooked. And then we do spend a great deal of time on developing a shared understanding of the issues very early so that we can make sure that we're all clear on what is it that we actually are trying to solve. And sometimes this includes defining terms or bringing clarity, but we always want to be leaning into nuance and not try to flatten it or try to oversimplify an issue. So those are really important pieces of that. I believe that a handout is going to be sent either in the chat or via email, one on our collaborative problem-solving process, and one specifically on connecting questions. So if that is going to come in the chat, this would be a great time to do that. But connecting questions for us is our main approach for how we build relationships and foster trust. Essentially, we are asking folks to reflect and disclose really important pieces that help shape their perspective and their views on how they feel about a given issue. And it also creates opportunity for us to learn together rather than assuming why folks feel the way that they do. And it helps us lean into those complexities. So on the next slide here, I have some examples of connecting questions that you might use in the first few sessions of this collaborative problem-solving process. So as you can see here, one might be, how do you feel that you and those who are aligned with your perspective are misunderstood? Where is an area that you have mixed feelings or doubts on this issue? What is oversimplified about this issue? And then to help kind of create a vision together, what does the world look like when we've addressed this issue? So really, we're having folks share their own personal experience with the specific issue to help build that understanding across the diverse participants. Mariah, are there any examples from our work at Convergence that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so in the case of that childcare project, on the first time the group met, we met for a day and a half, and that's typical for us. For the first meeting of any group, we're often meeting for a day and a half, and that is so that we have time for folks to be able to build relationships and get to know each other, so that we can go slowly, intentionally, and really set a foundation. So we spend a lot of time having folks answer questions like these connecting questions. We make time for meals. So in that first meeting in Kentucky, we had lunch brought in that day, and then folks went out to dinner that evening. Then we got back together the next morning. We had some sort of light, bagels and things available. So some of it's just the time and the breaking bread together. One of the things that we did on that childcare project is we went around the room, and there were about 40 people in that room. It was a pretty big table, and so it took a while. But we asked people to share a personal story that shapes their views on childcare. So that piece about it being a personal story, that really elicits some vulnerability. And that vulnerability tends to be sort of contagious. Once one person is vulnerable, others are vulnerable, and that vulnerability, that being real and open, is a huge piece of what builds trust. And so when we asked that question, one of the people in the room shared very emotionally that her and her brother, their parents were the first generation in their family who had had two parents in the workforce, and that her and her brother had been the first two kids kind of lifted out of pretty intense poverty. Kentucky has a part of the United States called Appalachia that's one of the poorest, most underdeveloped parts of the United States. And there are still many households that live very, in very high poverty contexts, and that had made all the difference for their family. And that was very emotional for her. And someone else went on to share that while she came from a very religious background and believed that she wanted to be at home with all of her kids, she had had 4 pregnancies unintended in a row and had 4 young kids, and was sort of at a breaking point. And that shifted her thinking around childcare. And her husband went on to run some daycare centers, and that's why they were in the process. So that eliciting personal stories, it can feel unusual and uncomfortable in a kind of formal setting that involves leaders from the private sector, the public sector, but we really think that that's one of the most important things about our methodology, is to spend that time getting people to know each other on a human level. And then we also, in building that shared understanding of the issues, we also go slow there, because what we know is that people often jump into the solutions, and that's where they start fighting and kind of get stuck. They say, the government should pay for more childcare. No, the government doesn't have a role in paying for childcare. The private sector should provide it. No, that's not the private sector's job, and people get stuck. And so we're pulling back from those solutions that seem mutually exclusive to say, let's develop a better understanding of the issue. And we start not by providing facts and data, but we start by doing what we call relational learning. So when people answer the questions, like the ones that are up on the slide and that Gabe just read aloud, they learn from each other's personal experience rather than from the data. And I don't know how it is for you all, but in the US, there is huge amounts of distrust about information sources these days. And people aren't open to the data and the information and the analysis initially. And so we say that opening hearts opens minds. So we start by having the group answer questions like these that sort of opens their hearts to each other. And then their minds are more open to looking at some of the analysis and data. And so in Kentucky, then we went on to have panels who talked about relevant topics such as innovative models that were working, what were the laws that govern childcare in Kentucky, what were the funding streams from the federal and the state government. And we often had participants in the group doing those presentations. So they were people who they had built trust with, and sometimes we bring in outside people as we need to. So that's a little bit about what that looked like in one convergence topic. Anna, what are your reflections on this second phase of our process around bringing folks together?
Well, first of all, to my point of view, it's like the most important process in whole this procedure, the most important stage, because you have to build trust. And if trust won't be built, so whole process will be a big failure, I think. And it's actually can be difficult in Ukraine right now, because you told that it takes a lot of time to build trust, sometimes a day and a half, just for example, one meeting. And in Ukraine now, the specific of our reality is that we are on very low resources, emotional resources, first of all. We have high emotions because of these low resources, and we usually seek for fast solutions. So I think the problem can be that if there is some issue that need to be resolved, some parties will seek for fast solutions. And that's why it can be, pretty difficult to realize this stage, in full.
Yeah.
And because it's so important, so we can't miss it, right? And it can, I think there can be difficulties here with this stage. But I think that, we can figure something out to do that, probably in more short period of time.
Yeah. On your first point about kind of people being emotionally taxed and drained, I think while it is sort of an emotional labor to participate in this kind of process, what I have found is that while initially people feel anxious about coming, nervous about sharing personal stories, nervous about hearing and considering the views of people who they feel are really on the other side of an issue from them, that at the end of the day, it ends up sort of filling people's emotional cups and making them feel better. Because when people find that the people who they thought were really, terrible and horrible, actually, even if I don't agree with their reasons, I now understand that they have reasons that make sense to them. And so now I don't think that they're a bad person, even if I don't agree with them. And that is emotionally sustaining or filling more than draining. And in many cases, people even build relationships across those differences, and that ends up being an emotionally sustaining process. I also think it's small things, but providing a nice space for people, providing food, we try to provide, cover people's travel costs if they need to, or reimburse them some for their time when we can get that kind of support. So I think there are some tools for addressing that very real challenge. On the timing challenge, I think there is a degree to which it takes some time, but I think that time is more about the total number of hours than how many months or years it takes. So a process for us might take a year, but we meet once a month. I think a group could meet once a week, and, cover the same amount of hours in a shorter span of time. So I think there are different ways to do it. And the last thing I would say in reaction to what you said is, when it's possible to solve things more quickly, we don't necessarily recommend this process. Like sometimes a side can sort of win, and that's okay, and you can get something done. It's more when something feels stuck. And while it feels like an investment of time to do this, it's actually more time on the front end, but less time on the back end than sort of staying stuck. So I, in the US as well, have to remind people that while this is taking a while, it's shorter than litigation, it's shorter than, staying stuck in conflict.
Thank you, Mariah.
All right, Gabe, you want to move?
Absolutely. And it's true, right? Collaborative problem solving does take time, whether we meet once a week or once a month. And not every issue is ripe for this specific process. I think that's really important to name. It really, that's why we do all of the background research and the discovery and design to make sure that this process will be a good fit for what it is we're trying to do. With that in mind, I'm going to go to phase 3, which is developing what we again call higher ground solutions. So as a part of that process, we need to make sure to first establish those common goals, right? What is the shared vision? And then for the folks on the call that are our mediators, I believe a number of you are, you're familiar with the concept of needs and interests. So for those that are not, really understanding what is behind the position that someone holds, right? They might say that they want this or don't want that, but what is behind that? What is the specific value that's driving that position that they have come to? So identifying those is really important to make sure you understand what is behind what they're stating. And then brainstorming together options. In just a second, I'll show you a slide for a way that we think about how to best approach options, but it's really making sure that you keep those needs front and center. Together with the group, we evaluate the possible solutions to try and achieve consensus. So there's a number of ways you can do this, right? Voting. There's a method of fist to 5, and if it doesn't have at least 3 fingers, then you don't move forward with that specific proposal. But we want to make sure that we are evaluating all of the solutions that come up, and then together achieving consensus on which ones we will move forward with. And once we've done that, we then develop what we call a blueprint for action. So we actually take the time to write this down, make sure that there is a document that we all have that clearly explains what we have come up with before we think about what's needed next. So on the next slide here, I have an image that talks about options. The way that we think about it is only proposals that include others' needs succeed. So during that brainstorming process, of course, we want to try and get as many ideas as possible and be creative. But as we're starting to figure out which are the ideas we're going to pursue, we need to think about those proposals that really do include the others' needs. Because without that inclusion, ultimately, those solutions will not be successful. So that's an important piece of it. It can be, difficult in practice, but once you start to have a conversation around needs and interests and kind of cultivate that mindset that's needed, then folks really do understand oftentimes what it is that we're trying to get at together. Mariah, any examples you'd like to share about this stage?
So one way that we often get started in this stage is that we have a group develop some sort of a shared vision or guiding principles. And the reason that we do this is largely because when people feel like they're on opposite sides of an issue that they care about, they start to forget that most of us have shared goals. Most people want a strong economy and a clean environment and good schools. But when we think about the people who we perceive to be on the other side of an issue that's close to our heart, we start to think they're mean and selfish and manipulative. And when we go through this process of developing a shared vision, it reminds us that, okay, we do share our high level goals and values around this issue. What we differ on is how to achieve those, but that's okay. That level of disagreement is the kind of constructive rather than destructive conflict that can kind of push our thinking to a new level. So in Kentucky, they developed a vision statement about childcare, and they had 7 or 8 kind of key principles underneath it. And one of those was around parental choice and flexibility. So there are some disagreements about whether the particularly government investment to support access to childcare should be supporting centers for childcare, or should be helping parents to stay home if that's their choice, or should be able to be used flexibly to support, grandma or a neighbor providing childcare. And because we have this separation of church, of religion and government, is it okay for government dollars to go to faith-based providers, of which there are many in the US? And so rather than fight about all of those things, the group developed a shared vision that said, part of their vision, it said, parents are empowered to pursue fulfilling careers, educational goals, and life choices with the help and support of their trusted and preferred childcare provider. Flexibility, while not every family will need access to childcare or choose to use it, families have available to them flexible choices that fit their unique circumstances, match their values, and offer safe, nurturing, and developmentally appropriate learning environments. So again, they were able to establish this shared vision around some of the issues that were real sticking points. And once they have that vision, we often do an exercise where they identify all the different needs they're trying to meet with their solutions to achieve that vision, and then they develop these higher ground solutions. And just to give you one example of the type of higher ground solution that they developed, in the United States, most people pay for their childcare, and it's a huge part of most parents' expenses, like might cost as much as they're spending on their housing. And the government provides subsidies, support for the most low-income families. And there's a lot of disagreement about whether the government should do more or not. And so this group, one of the solutions they developed was that for families who are above that level where the government is paying, but it's still very difficult for them to pay, rather than just having the government pay, they developed what they call a tri-share model, which meant the government would pay 1/3 for those families, the family would pay 1/3, and the employer would pay 1/3. So it created an avenue for employers who need to have employees in the workforce to contribute to solving this issue. I'm going to turn to you now, Anna, on your reflections on this develop higher ground solutions piece of the process.
Well, it's difficult to add something because it will totally work. Also in Ukraine, taking into account all the specifics of our disputes or problems. So absolutely, this stage is totally, logic and will totally work.
Yeah, great. Anything else more generally that you're thinking at this point, Anna, about any of this, how it fits or doesn't, or any places where you think you may have observed something like this being used in the past, or could be used in the future?
Well, we also have a big history of such facilitations in different process and in different cities. And for example, I'm from Lviv, and here in Lviv we had a lot of such situations where our local government, they asked us for help to resolve some issues, and we actually used some kind of probably it didn't call this way, but it was something like that. So we identify the conflict, then we identify the stakeholders, then we chose the participants, and we start talking, finding interests. But usually it took not so much time. Yes, so we had, for example, several meetings with people, and we tried to speak with them, to lower their emotions and identify their needs and interests, and then we bring them together and start speaking about some possible solution. And And I know that colleagues have a lot of such experiences in Kiev and also in East Ukraine, and in South Ukraine. So such practices are quite not popular as we would like them to be, but still, so they are applied. And of course, with some differences, but still they are quite popular between our mediators and facilitators community.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I think lots of this stuff is used in lots of parts of the world. This is our particular way of packaging it up and adding some particular structure and rigor to it. But there are so many, I think, sort of indigenous to places approaches in government, approaches coming out of mediation and dispute resolution. So thanks for that. All right, Gabe, you want to touch briefly on the last piece so that we can see if we have time for a couple of questions?
Absolutely. So the last stage, phase 4, is implementing the solution. So I'll talk about this quickly so that we can turn it over for questions and discussion. But essentially, actually coming up with a specific implementation plan after the blueprint for action. So who are the folks that are going to make commitments, what kind of resources they're going to specifically allocate, who is responsible for what? Because if we have these wonderful ideas, but then we don't put any real planning behind it, it might be that the solutions don't actually become actionable or implemented. What is the communication plan with stakeholders? So after this process that we've been meeting for weeks, months, or even years, what is the continued communication with those stakeholders going to look like? And then in advance, try to identify what the barriers and challenges might be so that when we actually come up against them, we have a plan for how to best address them. So this is the 4th and final phase. And with that, I am going to just make sure that we have the last 5 to 6 minutes or so for any questions and reflections. So I think some folks might be utilizing the chat. I'm also happy to turn it over to Bruce and Susan if you have any questions you'd like to ask us, but want to make sure we have some time for that in the last couple of minutes.
I just wanted to ask Mariah to give our audience an example of a higher ground solution you were able to achieve, just to give them a sense of trajectory of what this can accomplish. And while at the same time, letting people know that it doesn't always have to be high social issues. It can be neighborhood disputes of different sorts that this methodology is equally adaptable to. Take just a moment and give them an example of where this can lead.
Sure. So one example is in the United States a few years ago, there was a lot of concern about the way the police interacted with the community, particularly men of color, and the general public became more aware that more men of color were being killed by police officers. And that happened in the city that I live in the United States. And the community was very angry, understandably. People were coming and shouting during the city council meetings, and the city council, in fact, was sort of fleeing the chambers. And so they asked the place that I worked for at the time to get involved and help them design a process to address their challenges of policing and being an inclusive city. And that group came up with a whole bunch of higher ground solutions, including they did change who provided their policing services, but they reoriented their policing to be more community-based so that the police officers would be developing more relationships in the community, to be less reactive to low-level types of issues. The man who had been killed in this case had been pulled over for having a busted tail light, so reoriented the police to focus on more important crimes and also to be more involved in prevention. And then also reoriented some city resources to building stronger relationships in the community. So they allocated more city budget to training and education, to some different ways of tracking impacts on different parts of the community. So that's one example.
Thank you. Let me ask Anna a question. As you listen to this methodology, Anna, do you have ideas on the types of disputes that this might readily be able to address, either today or potentially in a post-war environment?
Thank you for your question. Yes, definitely. I think, well, nowadays we have so many. We have a war, and still during this, we have a lot of conflicts inside our society because Ukraine is a very big country, and we have a lot of people here, and a lot of issues, of course. Probably not now. I will talk in Ukrainian because I was thinking about one specific conflict that can be resolved in this way.
So now I'm talking about the following situation which arose in Ukraine. A lot of our service persons die every day, and state administration organizes the places of honorable burials of these service persons. So now it is high time to create the memorials at the places of these burials. In Lviv, we had a competition for the memorial complex creation at such burials. And we have one winner project of this competition. However, after this project was announced a winner, some parents of the perished service officers were drastically against that memorial complex. Including, they were saying that they would like to take the bodies of their perished children and move to some other cemetery. This conflict situation arose not only there, but in other places as well, because the local administrations want to create these memorials since we have funerals every day. So this is a painful issue. And the question is how to satisfy everyone with this memorial, how not to offend anyone creating this memorial. So the problem is called creation of the memorial complex at the burial site. So I believe this is one of the global issues. But at the same time, I believe that we can solve this issue this way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mariah, Gabriel, do you have any observations to add to what we just heard?
Yeah, that strikes me as a wonderful opportunity to use a process like this where emotions are so high and it's so close to people's heart. And that is a time when I think it's really worth all of the time to do a more elaborate process where there might be sort of a core group of people who engage collaboratively in the ways that we've talked about, but where there are also many more ways to get many more people involved. So in the thing that I just mentioned about the police and the community a minute ago, we had multiple conversations with the whole community where hundreds of people would come, and we would sit them in small groups in circles with facilitators who would ask them really thoughtful questions like, what are the values that you want to see the city reflecting in the way it does policing? And so asking questions like that, how do you want the memorial to make people feel? What is most important to you that it accomplishes, and summarizing all of that and developing themes. So it strikes me as a perfect issue to approach collaboratively without a competition. I understand the idea behind the competition to let a lot of people weigh in, but to take a more collaborative approach and to take the time to involve a lot of people, it seems like a perfect example to me.
I would agree, right? A less of a win-lose situation, but more of a how can we all be happy with the final solution that we create together that includes what's most important to all of us. So Anna, I think that's a wonderful application as well. I want to be mindful of the fact that we are just over time. Bruce, I didn't know if you had any final remarks. I am just putting up some contact information for Convergence here on this last slide. But with that, if anyone would like to say any final remarks, I know personally, I just really appreciate the time today. And Anna, thank you so much for being here and walking through our process and reacting each step of the way.
I would echo that. Mariah, Gabriel, thank you for your sort of thoughtful guidance and education and sort of leadership for our friends here in Ukraine. Whatever we can offer them that might make a difference in their lives, I think is both truly appreciated and of tremendous value. And when I listen to this, as much as I have been on the advisory board for years and appreciate the process day in and day out, I'm still amazed at what some might describe as the sort of magic of the process itself. But I hesitate to use that word because it's really much more than magic. It's really thoughtful, founded on building trust and on sort of human emotion. And those of us that work close to the flame of that day in and day out and see the results can really only be inspirational leaders to our friends in Ukraine and let them know that this process works. It does take time. It's important to learn the detail about how to make it work. But once you learn that detail and have the motivation to navigate its course, it does offer tremendous benefit. So I encourage people to stay in touch with all of us and drill down on and read the materials that have been provided today. Gabriel, I trust we could make the slides available to our hosts as well. But I truly appreciate the generous gift of time, Gabriel and Mariah, you've given us, and Anna for kind of leading things from the Ukraine's side today. So thank you, everybody. Again, be well, be safe. But Anna, any final thoughts from your side?
I just want to say thank you, and first of all, for your precious time, for your knowledge that you shared today with us. Thank you for your support to Ukraine. It's very important for us to feel it, to know that you are here with us. And thank you for inspiring us with your way of collaborative solving process. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And just know that Louisa and those at the Mediation Academy are going to be sending out both the presentation as well as the documents that Gabriel referred to in Ukrainian. They've been translated for you.
Thank you, Susan.
So thank you very much. Everybody have a wonderful evening.